Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Knack. I'm the City Councilor for Ward 1 in the City of Edmonton, which is the west end of the City of Edmonton. And we've been doing a number of conversations with different community leaders, business leaders, to chat about how the work that these groups are doing, not just within Ward 1, but really across the city. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by Jason Pisesky. He is the chair of the Accessibility Advisory Committee. And for those of you who aren't aware, I get to the very good fortune of sitting as the City Council representative on the Accessibility Advisory Committee. So I get to go listen into the conversations, occasionally offer commentary, but really just there to support the great work that the entire committee is doing. But you don't have to hear it from me. I'd like to turn it over to you, Jason. And if you want to just introduce yourself to everyone, how long you've been involved in, and a little bit about what the Accessibility Advisory Committee does.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you very much for having me on behalf of the AAC. Andrew, pleasure to be here. So my name is Jason, and I have been the chair for 1 year, and I'm going into my second. And this is my 5th year now on the committee. So the AAC is a committee of council, and our job, we kind of have 2 jobs. So on the one hand, we are a public engagement arm of council and the city. We host several events throughout the year to celebrate and highlight successes of the city in the areas of accessibility and inclusion and disability. By the same token, we also use our public engagement activities to gather feedback from citizens about issues that still need to be resolved or that could be done better. So that's the public engagement side of our operations. Then at the same time, we also have a policy advising arm, which works with City Council, yourself, and colleagues, as well as the administration of the city to kind of take the information that we've gathered from the public at our events and translate it to you and try to offer advice and solutions to problems that people are facing in the city. So kind of the two sides of our operations.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, and it's so impressed with the work that comes forward from the Accessibility Advisory Committee. I'll call them AAC probably for the rest of this session here. And I think you really touched on an important piece, which is that we're seeing some great policy changes because of the work of the committee. And again, this is all of you are just volunteering your time to help build a better city, a more accessible city. And so really thank you for your leadership as chair and really the entire work of the committee to help create what we're trying to do right now. I do have the part of why we're doing these is to talk about how different groups are impacted right now by the pandemic, both in terms of the actual organization that you serve on, but maybe the broader community that you're hearing from. So different groups, I know people with disabilities may be reaching out and have been reaching out to the Accessibility Advisory Committee to talk about what challenges they're facing. And we'll start with just finding out, how has COVID-19 impacted the work of the committee itself? And what have you been hearing from Edmontonians who are reaching out? What are they dealing with?
Absolutely. So on the first front, we probably have a disproportionately large impact on what we're doing because the spring is a very busy time for the AAC, and we have a lot of our public engagement events during the spring, and a lot of our calendar was cleared off in mid-March and April in light of the spreading pandemic. So we are actually right now, although I'm not sure when this video will be posted, we are right in the middle of National Accessibility Week. Last year, that was our second annual recognition of it, and it was a banner year. We had accessible open house tours. We had a legally blind competitor from Amazing Race Canada come and give a meet and greet and a talk. We had a former Fringe Festival performer give a performance. We had lots of things going on throughout the city, and we had planned this year to do a art festival centered on inclusion and accessibility and disability. but those were all canceled. At the same time, we were going to mix in with that public engagement on the new policy that City Council passed last year, the policy for accessibility for persons with disabilities. So that's big for us, losing those in-person events and those opportunities to meet with people and talk with them about what this policy means to them, what it could mean to them, what they hope to get out of it. So that's unfortunate. We've communicated with a lot of our kind of mirror groups across Canada in all the different cities. And of course, I think they all universally had the same effect. They had been planning lots of events for National Accessibility Week, I might refer to it as, and those have all gone online and become just social media initiatives. And that's what we've done. We've developed an action calendar with 30 days of content, whether those are funny stories or uplifting stories or educational pieces, how to deal with isolation in quarantine. And we'll be sharing that throughout the month and various other pieces of content on different specific days. So on the same token, on the policy side, where we again give advice to City Council, we had a summer chock full of topics we were excited to follow up on, whether that was snow and ice or e-scooters or River Valley access. There was lots of things on the agenda that we were excited to either write reports on or comment on reports to City Council. And a lot of those have been postponed or canceled or put in limbo. So, and then from the community at large, we're hearing lots of things. Of course, situations like these can sometimes differentially impact persons with disabilities who have even greater senses of isolation sometimes when their staff aren't allowed to come to their place and visit them, or when transportation becomes limited or restricted. And so we've heard a lot of things. A lot of them are the same issues, but just more pronounced now than ever. So it's a task of trying to keep on top of those. And in light of the pandemic, we're going to be hopefully putting together either a memo to council or a report to council, highlighting those along with some of the opportunities available to that we've learned through this experience. So.
Do you want, and thank you for that. And actually that leads a little bit perfectly into the other question, touching on the opportunities piece. Have you started talking about a number of the challenges. What are some of those things that have been identified that we might want to be aware of when we're talking about how we're going to provide services differently going into the future? And I mean, I know it's early days because you want to put together that report, but what are some of the things that you've heard so far that you might want to identify at this point?
Well, a lot of it, and I'd like to focus on like the positive of things that we're seeing that have had a good impact and we want to see perhaps carry on. So one of the best examples I've seen is from Edmonton Public Libraries. Mm-hmm. Within a few weeks of the shutdown, they launched their EPL at Home, I believe is the name of the program, EPL at Home, where they are hosting virtual book clubs. They're hosting language classes for English, for Cree language. They have writer workshops for the avid writers out there. So I think that's fantastic, because I think what EPL, and I think a lot of people have realized through this pandemic is that it can be really isolating and mentally taxing to be stuck at home, cut off from people. And so the problem is that when the pandemic is over and, huge chunk of the population goes back outside and resumes their lives, there's still going to be a bunch of people who are either trapped at home or who don't have the same opportunities to attend all of the events that the rest of everyone else might go back to enjoying, whether that's because of, not being able to line up transportation consistently, or not being able to sign up for a in-person book club 2 weeks from now because they might not know the medical situation in 2 weeks. So I'm hoping that something like EPL at Home might be able to carry over after the pandemic to offer these kind of opportunities to people who might not normally be able to enjoy them. I think they're fantastic, and I think they're very beneficial. That's why I think they got launched, and I hope they're being taken advantage of. So At the same time, another example is a lot of gyms, yoga studios, fitness gyms started kind of online programs for their members. And I know the City of Edmonton rec facilities have now started to do that themselves. And so again, I think that is fantastic because not everyone is able to make it out to those spaces consistently. And not everyone is able to have programs designed for them. So I think there's an opportunity to kind of build a more inclusive class environment and services for people by having virtual options for people to attend. So
excellent.
Those are a couple fantastic and positive examples I see going on. We have some comments on them. With some of the rec center videos, maybe we could improve the captioning on them, or have, if the idea is to continue them on, then like myself, being legally blind, having maybe some more clearer directions for people who can't follow the visual cues quite as well to follow along with some of the exercises being demonstrated. But I think the foundation and the idea is phenomenal.
Yeah, that's a really great point. You talk about some of those other accessible features, and it's something that, as I've tried to go into a lot more video events, I do my town halls, but I realize that's a gap, because if I'm doing them live on Facebook on their own, you're not always guaranteed to have it. I did a meeting, a virtual town hall a week ago at the time of recording this, with Councillor Sarah Hamilton, and we did it through Zoom, but then live streamed it through Facebook, and we were able to put on the live captions, which is great. But even here, these videos on Zoom, unless you have these third-party apps and you have to subscribe to them and put them in, like, you have to manually enter. And so I think we're going to be doing that on a number of these for that reason. But it has made me more aware around, I think, the lack of tools, simple and easily accessible tools to put in things like captioning. To me, that should just be a standard. I mean, the fact that I don't just have a button I could click here on Zoom that says immediately take captions, and then you can adjust them if they didn't catch the word correctly. But the fact that it's not like a default actually is rather surprising to me. So we have to keep working on that, and I really appreciate that as a city. I think we have an obligation to be doing that in what we're doing in those videos and in those various programs. So really appreciate that point. I wanted to ask a little bit about, as we go into this reimagine phase and this relaunch phase, I'm going to really ask two different questions. One of which is do you see whether it's the committee itself as the Accessibility Advisory Committee, or persons with disabilities represented so far in what the city's been talking about for the reimagining work, the relaunch work? And even if so, and so hopefully we do, but if not, and even if you do, what are some of the gaps in the areas of improvement so far? I know, having attended one of the meetings, I think we did in April even, there was a fairly extensive list that was drawn up around things that I think both we as the city need to be aware of and working on, and then just more broadly what other orders of government need to be working on. But so I guess really focusing on those two questions, do you think there is good enough involvement yet for persons with disabilities and how we're going to reimagine things? And then also, what are the gaps in areas of improvement that you've identified?
I think the AAC, we feel very well engaged. But I think, of course, we're a 15-member committee, and there's such a broad spectrum of all different types of levels of disability and inclusion and ability. So I think it is key, you're right, to make sure that it's not just the AAC that is included, but that Edmontonians as a whole. And so I think the AAC feels very well included in these discussions, especially in particular in light of, I think, the new policy that was passed, the policy C602, policy for persons with, accessibility for people, Edmontonians with disability. I can't remember the exact name. It's a very long name. Yeah. I wanted the accessibility bylaw, but I think that was already taken. But yes, we feel very well engaged, but I think it's important for all Edmontonians to feel that way. And one of one of the things I think we've learned is that this technology is pretty good. It's not perfect, as you said, with the live captioning. That can sometimes be an issue. Access to the technology can also be an issue. Not everyone has consistent internet or iPads or iPhones to make these connections on. But that said, I think one thing the AC is going to be looking at is it possible to host town halls and focus groups through this technology? And just myself, I mean, I tend to participate in all the public engagement events around accessibility that pop up. And there's definitely a disparity. I mean, I attend ones in person, and you usually get to sit down with a dedicated person who talks with you. It's a conversation. You talk, you start on one topic, but you actually go off on a branch, and they take these detailed notes, and you trust that they make it into the system. And as opposed to a lot of online engagement, that's usually just a survey that's emailed out. And oftentimes there's open-ended questions, but it's difficult to come up with those on yourself when you're not sure what they're interested in or where it will go, as opposed to just having that organic conversation with someone who's listening and can direct your attention to different areas of concern that they want information on. So I think we would like to explore the possibility of using this technology a little more to create more in-person public engagement, because I think it tends to be more fruitful and valuable than just sending out an email survey that a lot of people, it'll either get sent to their junk mail or they think won't go all the way to the people who need to hear it. So
love that suggestion. And I think, I've been enjoying trying to do more virtual things over the past really 10 weeks. But I think you raise a really important point about even just access to, I think, engagement events, because, I actually know, and I think we've heard this, that, if we did an engagement session, even if it's right at City Hall where, you have access to transit from everywhere, if you had 30 people who only use DATs want to attend that one engagement session on an evening, probably all wouldn't be able to actually make it. Because, if everyone was getting ready to leave at the same time, would we actually be able to provide transportation for people who are using DATs if that many people, and I mean, that doesn't sound like a large number, but when it comes to the system that we have, it is actually a large number. And so what are we doing to make sure that we don't create that artificial barrier? Are there people who don't even bother thinking about reaching out to say, I'd like to attend, but I have concerns, because they sort of made a decision that it's not worth it for me. It's impossible. So using the new tools available to us, they don't have to replace those other pieces, but we should reimagine how we're using these tools. And I love the idea of those more conversational elements, because even something like, as I'm learning how to use Zoom or different video conferencing tools, there are certain ones where you can break out and go into breakout rooms. And maybe you have different themes that you want to talk about. You can have a breakout room and actually engage with somebody from the city to talk about that issue, and then you can go back into the main group. And I honestly think that's probably even better for a lot of our city staff who, I mean, they work tirelessly at those engagement sessions. You sometimes have, 10 or 15 people out, depending on the issue that's being discussed. And, these are sometimes 3-4 hour events. And the flexibility that it might provide to be able to sort of do it from home at times too, and be able to engage people and have those same conversations. This is an interesting approach. So really, yeah, that's a great point of something we need to be thinking about. And it reminds me that I'll make sure I bring it up with our Guiding Coalition on Public Engagement, because I also sit as the council rep on that group, and they're thinking about how engagement will be done differently in the city because of this.
Yeah, it's good, because it's such a weird balance too of, you have to get the city staff who can work after hours to try and get people's attention, because not everyone can, of course, take off at 2 p.m. to go drive across the city for 30 minutes. But at the same time, even if you put it at 5 o'clock, that's dinner time or soccer practice or rec league hockey for yourself, so.
Yeah, and like even because I've done a lot of in-person town halls, and I mean I enjoy them because it is hard to completely replace that in-person element. But for the reasons you just talked about, you know, I rarely get more. Like I feel lucky if I get 50 people. Usually it's like, you know, 20 to 30 max, and you know 80,000 plus people live in Ward 1, and that's how many we get. Yet when I do a video town hall, you know, within a week, it's probably had about 1,000 people who have taken the time to listen to it or watch it, which says a lot about just making it available to people on their own schedule. It makes such a difference, and that's actually something that could be done with using these tools, because these, like we're doing now, we're recording this on a specific day and a specific time, but we can actually record it and then just post it later. So if somebody's doing that meeting and they missed the live version because they couldn't join, well, you can post that on the city website. People can watch those breakout sessions, see what questions people were asking, and still feel like they get a similar benefit. And then when they go to fill out that online survey, they've had the benefit of experiencing what happened at the physical location. So yeah, this is there's a lot of potential in this. Even just how we've done council meetings has been transformed, and I think this shows that it is possible to run virtual meetings. And you might not use it exclusively to replace everything, but sure nice to have that option. Well, that's great. Well, this has been wonderful. Really appreciate the conversation. Before I wrap up, I guess I wanted to just hear from you around anything you want to share with Edmontonians watching this around how people can stay informed about the work that you're doing, how people can share feedback if they've got things they want to be known when it comes to accessibility in the city of Edmonton. Just anything you want to share as sort of some closing thoughts.
Absolutely. So again, we are right in the middle of NAW, National Accessibility Week. So people can follow us on Facebook, Accessibility Advisory Committee. They can follow us on Twitter at AACYEG. We have content that'll be going out throughout the month, all about accessibility and inclusion. If people have specific accessibility issues, we always encourage calling and logging them with 311 or using the 311 app. The AAC uses 311 data quite a bit when we need to, when we think we've identified an issue we want to bring to council, we oftentimes look at 311. So even if it sometimes feels like you're shouting into the void, the city does do a really good job of logging your complaints and issues and creating a nice history of them. So we do rely on that. So I do encourage the use of 311. Yeah, those are my closing remarks. Follow us on social media, stay engaged, keep communicating with the city through 311, and hope everyone stays safe and healthy.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for acknowledging National Accessibility Week as well. That was something I was going to do when I closed, so I'm glad you brought it up now and at the beginning as well, because again, the work that the AAC does during this time is excellent, and it's important that we are thinking about that. And I think the worry is that sometimes it becomes a bit of an afterthought. You know, if you don't have any type of, if you're not using a specific mobility aid, or if you don't have a specific disability, you might not always consider that. And I think it does need to be top of mind. It's part of why that policy you talked about was so important, because the goal of that policy is to embed accessibility into everything we do, and not make it thought about after we've done it. It's that building it right in from the beginning, whether we're creating a new program, we're developing a service, whether we're building something. How is accessibility being brought into that at the beginning of the process? Because, I mean, let's be honest, we've seen some examples in the city where you can tell it was done after the fact. I mean, we saw even just a few years ago, I think the one that always stood out to me was that when those e-park machines went in, some of the ones in the downtown, on the first day they were installed with this large sort of cement piece where the machine sat on top of it. So we had people in wheelchairs, including our former chair of accessibility of AAC, Zachary, unable to use the equipment because that wasn't being thought about at the beginning. We also ran into, and I share this because you know, the city has made mistakes. We all, and I'm not, when I say the city, I get to point at myself too, because we're the ones who are being part of this. And that's why this policy was so important, because I think what it will do is it will help to minimize that and ideally eliminate it from happening at the very beginning. And I think you're going to get better programs, you're going to get better services, you're going to get better infrastructure if this is done right at the beginning, because if you design it for everyone, everyone can benefit from it from the start. So thanks for bringing up the National Accessibility Week. And I think, and I hope that we don't just look at it for a week. We recognize that this is an ongoing conversation. So if you're a community organization, if you are a business group, make sure you're thinking about accessibility. When you're hosting your virtual event, do you have somebody who's going to be doing captioning? When you are running a program, how are you incorporating accessibility into what you're doing? So and again, I just want to end by saying thank you for your leadership on the committee as chair. It's been a pleasure to work with you. And again, I think that policy is the culmination of many, many, many years of work, because it's really took us decades to update it. So I'm glad to see that it is now there and it's going to really fit within every area. So thanks to you, thanks to the entire committee, because again, you're all just volunteers for your time. You're not getting paid to do this. You're doing this out of the kindness of your heart and the desire to make a more accessible Edmonton. So it's been a pleasure, and thanks for joining me today for this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you watching and listening. This has been a great conversation with Jason from the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and please do follow them on social media and make sure that if you do notice anything that you want to identify as you've heard, make sure you're reporting that so we can continue to take action. Thanks everyone for watching.